Audience discretion is advised due to potentially distressing and sensitive material. Cindy was enjoying a trip through Florida Panhandle in August 1990 when she heard of a series of murders that had left Gainesville, Florida in utter terror. It was so bad that parents were bringing their children back home even though the semester had just started. Everyone was freaking out, and students were advised to take precautions no matter where they were or who they were with. No one was safe. Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, both 17 years old, were freshmen at the University of Florida. Both girls were very excited to be starting a new chapter of their lives. They had met during the summer and had decided to share an apartment off campus because all the campus dorms were already taken. Sonia's mother hated the fact that she was living off campus. Sonia was very sweet but at the same time extremely reserved, and her mom always worried about her. It was only days after the two had moved in together and had started college life when both of their families realized that they hadn't heard from them, which was odd. Both girls were told to check in with their families and let them know how things were going. Plus, Christina and Sonia were the type of girls who called their families on a daily basis just to hear their voices. It was strange. Remember that this was 1990, so there were no cell phones. Christina and Sonia hadn't called and their families couldn't reach them because the phone hadn't been installed yet. So, worried, Christina's parents, who lived closer to the girls' apartment, decide to drive over to make sure everything is alright. It was August 26th. They get there and ask a maintenance worker to let them in after banging on the apartment door for a while. The maintenance worker contacts his manager, and the manager tells him to call the police and ask them to accompany them. Well, this is where things get worse. So the worker breaks down the door, and the manager is standing right behind him, and there is a police officer right behind her. The second the door breaks down, the maintenance worker runs down the stairs screaming, oh my god," gets out of the complex and throws up. Now imagine this. Christina's parents were standing right there, and God knows what went through their minds when they saw this. When the worker opened the door, you could see a girl lying on a bed in a very suggestive way. She was dead. Now, let's rewind a little bit. In the early morning hours of August 24th, 1990, a man breaks into Sonia and Christina's apartment. When he enters, he sees Christina asleep on the couch on the first floor. He leaves her and walks up the stairs where he sees Sonia asleep in her room. He stabs her to death. She dies trying to fend him off. He then goes back down, wakes Christina up, makes her perform oral sex on him before he binds her, duct tapes her mouth, cuts her clothes off, rapes her, and stabs her in the back 5 times. He then goes back upstairs to Sonia's room where he rapes her corpse. Afterwards, he cleans the bodies and poses them in a sexual provocative position, takes a shower, and leaves the apartment. But before he leaves, he cuts off their nipples and keeps them as a trophy. The next morning, on August 25th, the same man breaks into Krista Hoyt's apartment, an 18-year-old chemistry honors student at Santa Fe College who was an aspiring police officer and worked part-time at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office while going to school. He enters her house by using a screwdriver through a sliding glass door. Krista isn't home, but he waits for her. When she gets home at around 11 a.m., he attacks her from behind and puts her in a headlock and overpowers her. He then proceeds to bind her, duct tape her mouth, cut her clothes off, rape her, and he stabs her to death. He stabbed her so violently that her heart ruptured. He also cuts off her nipples like the previous victims. When Christoph fails to show up to work at the sheriff's office on the night of August 26, they dispatch an officer to check on her. The officer finds Krista dead. She was sitting on the side of her bed with her feet on the floor. Her torso slumped forward and she was beheaded. Her head was on a shelf near her bed, looking down on her body. Apparently, the killer had left her body in a suggestive way and had left her house. But then he realizes that he doesn't have his wallet and thinks he's left it at her house and heads back. Then, because he wanted to shock whoever finds her, he decapitates her and poses her body for a second time. Tracy Paul's and Manny Doboda's bodies were found the next morning on August 28th. The 23-year-olds had been friends since high school and had just started living together. Manny had dreams of becoming an architect and Tracy was studying to become a lawyer. Tracy was really freaked out about what was going on and all the students that had been found murdered. But Manny reassured her that he was there to protect her no matter what. Tracy knew he would. He'd been protecting her since they were just a couple of teenagers. He always looked out for her. The man everyone was scared of and wished never to see was on the hunt again. He breaks into their apartment by prying open their sliding glass door, like he had before. Manny was asleep in one of the bedrooms and he was supposed to be on watch. He sees the man and they get into a struggle, but sadly, Manny gets stabbed and dies on the spot. Tracy, who had woken up because of all of the commotion, witnesses all of this and runs back to her room to barricade herself in, but is big and strong. He breaks down the door and walks inside. Tracy asks, "You're the one, aren't you?" And he says, "Yes, I'm the one." He then tapes her mouth and wrists, cuts her clothes off, and rapes her. Then he turns her and stabs her 3 times in the back. He again poses Tracy's body and leaves the apartment. This time, he doesn't mutilate the bodies, perhaps because he was interrupted or was in danger of getting caught somehow. The whole thing shocked the nation. Students brought baseball bats wherever they went and no one went anywhere alone. They triple-locked doors and slept in shifts or someone stayed up all night to make sure everyone was alright. Thousands of students left campus because they were fearing for their lives, and around 700 never went back to campus. The university canceled classes for a week because they didn't want to give the murderer the chance to follow any students home or learn their schedules. At the same time, the police learned of an unsolved triple homicide in Shreveport and noticed some specific similarities between the murders. The victims were 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. They had been attacked while preparing for dinner. Sean and Tom were stabbed to death, but Julie had been raped, mutilated, cleaned and posed just like the university students in Gainesville. She also had bite marks on her body. The sad part was that Scott Grissom, son to Tom, brother to Julie, and father to Sean, had just got married a week earlier and he got the news of their murders his first day back from his honeymoon. Anyway, trouble was, the killer got rid of the dog tape he used on his victims and cleaned his victims with vinegar to get rid of the evidence. By this point, the police knew that they were dealing with an unstable subject with a dark past and psychological problems who was after white petite brunettes with brown eyes. They did have a prime suspect, Ed Humphrey. He was 20 years old, studied at Florida University, and had a history of mental illness. He was known to carry knives, had visible scars on his face, and had previously been convicted for beating his grandmother. He was arrested and held in jail on a $1 million bond, and upon searching his house, the police found magazines about knives, guns, and girls. Plus, according to the technology of the time, Ed could be placed at some of the crime scenes, but the problem was They couldn't definitely say it was Ed's hair that was found on the scene, but at the same time, they couldn't say it wasn't. However, the police quickly learned that whoever the murderer was, he had type B blood, but Ed's blood type was A. Basically, they had zero evidence to tie Ed to the crimes. Fortunately, it wasn't long before they received a tip, and here's where we go back to the woman we talked about in the beginning of this episode. When she heard about the string of grisly murders, she couldn't stop thinking about this man who she'd met at her Louisiana hometown church. She'd heard him say the most bizarre things, and it wasn't just her. Her then husband, Stephen Dobbin, had also found his behavior really weird and uncomfortable. He used to go to their house every night, but one night, her husband just walked up to her and said, "He's gotta go." She found his comment ridiculous at first, but when she asked what had happened, Stephen said that the man had just confessed to him that, quote, "he likes to stick knives to people," end quote. On another occasion, he'd tell Cindy that, quote, "one day I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day," end quote. And this is why she decided to call Crime Stoppers and tell them about this guy. His name was Daniel Harold Rowling. Danny was born on May 26, 1954 to parents James Harold Rowling and Claudia Beatrice. Let's just say he wasn't born into the most loving family. James, his father, was temperamental, controlling, and violent, and verbally and physically abused his mother Claudia. He was a cop and a Korean War veteran in the US Army and never wanted children. But Claudia became pregnant at 19, 2 weeks after they got married. James was furious and he kept reminding Danny and his brother, who was born later on, that they were unwanted, and he was disgusted when Claudia got pregnant. He was so angry all the time that he would beat up his wife and children if they breathed in a way that he didn't like. I am not kidding. Claudia left him many times but always returned after a short time. She was even hospitalized after she tried to commit suicide and had a nervous breakdown when Danny failed the 3rd grade for too many absences because he was sick. James even beat Danny's dog to death right in front of him when he was a child, and the dog died in Danny's arms. I can't tell you how traumatizing I find this. But this is not the worst part. Danny was only 1 year old when he was beaten up for the first time. James started beating him because he wasn't crawling right. And when Danny's brother was born, things just got worse. All this led to Danny having a whole lot of problems. He was described by his school counselor as, quote, "suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control," end quote. As a teen, he was arrested several times in Georgia and Alabama and was caught spying on women and cheerleaders getting dressed. But he did try to find solace despite all the bad things that were going on around him and in his life. He got a guitar for Christmas at 15 and learned to play and sing hymn-like songs. Still, as an adult, this was his happiest memory. Even as an adult, things stayed the same for Danny. He still had trouble merging with society, took up drugs and alcohol at a young age, and couldn't hold onto a job for long. When he got older, he enlisted in the Air Force but was then kicked out after getting busted for possession of drugs after many warnings. He then left to live with his grandfather, which brought him some stability. He got married at the age of 23 and had a daughter, and for a while there, things were looking up. But old habits die hard. Danny started abusing his wife just the way his father had abused him and his mother, and ultimately, this drove his wife and child away. And here is where Danny took a turn for the worse. He started a string of armed robberies and was in and out of jail. He also raped a woman who resembled his ex-wife and from then on started forcing himself on women. Danny was losing it. He went as far as attacking his father James after a family argument went down. By attack, I mean he chased his father out of the house with a gun and shot him twice, once in the head and once in the stomach. His father survived but lost an eye and an ear. So from there, Danny freaked, got on a bus, left town, and assumed a new identity with documents he'd stolen from people. He was now in Gainesville. He had nowhere to go, so he set up a campsite in a wooded area behind the University of Florida. You can guess where this is going. Well, he now had access to apartments near the wooded area and could pretty much come and go without being noticed. At the same time, he continued with his armed robberies because he needed money. So when Cindy called Crime Stoppers to tell them about this guy she used to know, what she nor the police knew was that Danny was already in jail. Apparently, he robbed a bank at gunpoint and a teller had slipped a red dye pack into the money bag. Smart, right? And when the police noticed a guy half a mile away from the bank going into the wooded area with a bag and searched and arrested him, they found a campsite, a bag of money defaced with red eye, a cassette player with a tape inside, and a gun. So because there was a gun at the campsite, the police just assumed that Danny was a robber and no one thought he could be connected to the murders. So no one even bothered to listen to the tape. But after sending this tape to Crime Stoppers, officers went back to the evidence locker and started listening to the tape. The tape was a recording of a man talking and singing. He talks to his family, he talks about life and how he felt he went down the wrong road. He also talks about the murders of the students, and most importantly, at some point, he says his name, Danny Harold Rowling. This is a huge win for the police. They finally have the murderer in custody, not to mention that Danny's blood type was A. Danny was sent to Florida State Prison where he meets another inmate, Bobby Lewis, who's on death row for killing a drug dealer. Lewis claims that Danny told him the details of the murders, details only the murderer knew, and that Danny wanted to confess. So Lewis writes a 5-page letter outlining the details. Danny also insists that Lewis be present at the meeting where he is supposed to confess to all his murders and act as his mouthpiece. After Lewis tells everything to the officer, they ask Danny if what Lewis just said is true. Danny's affirmations were caught on tape, and so they had him for real. Danny claimed that in order for him to protect himself, he developed multiple personalities as a coping mechanism. The first was named Enid, which is Danny spelled backwards, who was described by Danny as a bad person but not evil. The second personality was called Gemini, who Danny blamed for his crimes and said that the devil made him do it, but nobody bought it. They argued that what Danny said was just based on a character from the film Exorcist 3, which he was watching the week he murdered the students. But he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. Danny also talked about his motive for the murders, saying that he wanted to be a superstar, just like Ted Bundy. Now I don't know where Danny got his information from, because I wouldn't describe Ted Bundy as a superstar. Plus, he was targeting women who resembled his mother, maybe because he saw her as the source of his misery. While he was in prison, he started corresponding with a journalist, Sandra London, who later became his fiancée and helped him put together the making of a serial killer. Fun fact, this lady was also G.J. Schiffner's girlfriend, the serial killer. Anyway, Danny pled guilty to all counts and was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He was put to death on October 25, 2006. His last meal was a lobster tail served with drawn butter, butterfly shrimp with cocktail sauce, a baked potato with sour cream and butter, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. The 52-year-old sang a hymn-type song that rambled on, and his microphone was cut off in the middle. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. Back in the day, a struggling actor and writer comes across this news story and becomes obsessed with the concept of a murderer killing students on campus. And this is why today we have come to know the Scream movie franchise so well. Kevin Williamson's career skyrocketed after he was inspired by this case to create the murderer in Scream. But these crimes not only inspired the making of Scream, but they also left many across the nation, especially those who lived close to Danny Rolling at some point and had loved ones disappear, to wonder whether Danny had anything to do with their disappearance. Please leave any theories or comments you might have for us down below. We're really interested to know what you think about this case.